The pain that was never acknowledged. My name is Jessica Adams, and if you asked anyone who knew me during childhood, they'd likely introduce me as Laura's little sister. From the beginning, it felt like my role in the family was already scripted. Laura was the dazzling protagonist, and I was the supporting act. Unnoticed, sometimes invisible, rarely celebrated. Growing up in a quiet suburb of Chicago, every day in our house seemed to orbit around Laura. She was 4 years older, tall, magnetic, the kind of girl whose laughter filled any room and whose achievements never missed the dinner table spotlight. I was the quiet one, the girl who always drew in her notebook at family gatherings and retreated to her room when company came over. It wasn't that I envied Laura, at least, not at first. I just learned early where the household's attention flowed. My dad glowed with pride at Laura's soccer games, gripping the fence and cheering every goal. At her debate tournaments, he'd beam, repeating her arguments word for word long after we got home. When Laura was named student body president as a sophomore, my mom baked a cake and called our relatives in Indiana to share the news. The whole house thrummed with this energy. My big sister's light, shining bright and hot. For me, recognition felt like a foreign language. I remember once, in 3rd grade, I won 2nd place in the regional spelling bee. Heart pounding, I brought home the little bronze trophy, all hope and expectation. As I set it on the kitchen table, my dad glanced at it, then at his watch. "That's nice, Jess," he said. "Have you seen Laura's science fair kit?" My mom smiled, but it faded so quickly, I wondered if I'd imagined it. It was no one's intention to hurt me, but the message landed anyway. In our family, good wasn't quite enough, not compared to great. It didn't help that I was the kind of kid who loved solo pursuits, the slow, methodical work of building a model rocket, or learning lines of code on our ancient desktop. While Laura was out with friends or collecting medals, I'd stay up late, lost in whatever project had caught my attention that month. I thrived in that quiet space, but it also meant I'd show up to breakfast, eyes bleary, only to hear Laura recount her latest triumph as if I hadn't even left my room. The rare times I did accomplish something big, it felt like the universe found a way to overshadow it. When I was 12, I spent weeks piecing together a robot from spare parts for the school science fair. To my shock and my teacher's delight, it worked. My robot won 1st place, a blue ribbon, a mention in the local paper. That night, I hurried home, ribbon in hand, imagining, just for once, my dad's hug, my mom's spontaneous cheer. At dinner, as I quietly placed the ribbon next to my plate, Dad didn't even look up from the newspaper. "Laura made the honor roll again," he said to Mom, who nodded and poured herself more coffee. It was as if my moment, so painstakingly built, had floated right past them. Laura wasn't cruel. In fact, she often smiled at me across the dinner table, sometimes even offered gentle advice. But there was a carelessness in her teasing. "Jess, you know you'd rather code than talk to people anyway." That left me stinging just the same. She didn't have to fight for recognition. It followed her everywhere, a cloud of attention I could never quite step into. After a while, I taught myself to stop sharing. It wasn't an act of rebellion, just survival. I got used to bottling my small victories, an A on a math test, a website built in secret, keeping them for myself so they wouldn't have the chance to disappoint me. Sometimes, I'd wonder if this was just how families worked. Maybe every younger sibling felt like a shadow, but whenever the subject of potential came up at parent-teacher conferences or in whispered conversations behind closed doors, it was always Laura's name, Laura's path, Laura's future. My silence was seen as something to fix. "You're too quiet, Jess," Speak up more. Why can't you be a little more like your sister? Over time, that refrain wore me thin. It was exhausting, having to prove myself over and over, only to be met with indifference or faint praise. Never the pride I saw reserved for Laura. I grew skilled at hiding my feelings, my wants, even my ambition. Worried that if I exposed too much, I'd only give them new ammunition for comparison. I became the expert in lowering expectations for myself, stifling the small hope that someday I'd walk into a room and be seen for me. But deep in my gut, a determination simmered. I promised myself quietly, privately, one day, I'll show them what I can do. I won't ask for their applause. I'll be undeniable. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe hope, maybe just the need to feel like I mattered, too. Whatever it was, the pain of never being recognized shaped me, more than any victory, and became the silent engine that drove everything I did next. Lonely success. Success, at least the kind you can put a price tag on, came to me early, but never felt like it belonged to me. By the time I was 23, while most of my MIT classmates were still nervously searching for their first real job, I'd already launched my first tech startup out of a cramped, sunless apartment in Cambridge. Late nights, ramen dinners, and endless debugging sessions shaped my mid-20s. My life, lived mostly on energy drinks and determination. The work was punishing, but purposeful. I loved every second. The puzzle of code, the way small improvements could scale to something bigger. Seeing an idea morph into a tool other people wanted. When my productivity app, SmartPal, finally started trending, I felt a flood of accomplishment I'd never known before. Reviewers raved, user numbers soared, and emails with investment opportunity flooded my inbox. That rush, the validation from strangers, became my substitute for the recognition I'd never had at home. 2 years later, SmartPal caught the eye of a Fortune 500 tech giant. The buyout negotiations were intense. I argued my own numbers, signed contracts in conference rooms high above the Boston streets, my hands shaking every time I turned over a page. When the deal finally closed at $10 million, I nearly stumbled out of the building, heart pounding, almost unable to believe that the quiet, overlooked girl from Chicago had become a millionaire. The first thing I did was call home. My palms sweating, hope rising, although I tried to choke it down. I wanted so badly to hear the pride in my dad's voice. The call rang out, echoed by my childhood longing. "Wow," he said over the clatter of dishes in the background. "That's good, Jess. Laura just started her new job in New York. She's meeting with the CEO next week." There was no pause, no cheer, not even a hint of admiration. My mom sent a card 2 days later with bland congratulations, but didn't even sign it. Laura, she didn't respond at all. It hit me harder than I expected. The money in my bank account was real, and so was the notoriety. But the empty space where their approval should have landed was as familiar as ever. Friends congratulated me. Former professors sent emails. LinkedIn buzzed with connections. But my family made my life's highest moment feel like just another blip, barely worth mentioning, never worth celebrating. I threw myself into work, building a new company. If admiration from the people I loved was out of reach, then perhaps purpose could replace it. I rented a sleek apartment in Boston, bought myself a car for the first time, but the city lights couldn't fill the vacuum. Each launch, each new feature, each magazine profile brought no word from my parents. Laura's career remained their favorite topic. Her promotions, her Central Park apartment, her magazine interviews. What I'd accomplished existed for them, if at all, as some footnote or convenient talking point to impress their friends. but never as something that could make them proud. I tried giving back, donating to my old schools, volunteering to teach girls to code, funding scholarships. At award ceremonies, the faces of strangers glowed with gratitude and awe. But there was always an ache tugging at the edges as I imagined the applause I believed should have come from home. There were moments when loneliness seemed sharper, celebrated only by people who didn't know my history, while those who did remained unmoved. Every tech summit or feature in a glossy magazine brought me fleeting joy, quickly replaced by the ache of that persistent absence. It felt like I was filling a stadium with strangers' cheers, still longing for a single quiet, "Well done, Jess," from my own family. The higher I climbed, the lonelier it became. Prominent business people reached out to me. Some sought mentorship, others partnership. Still, the silence from home grew into something I wore like a private bruise. Hidden, but always throbbing. I looked for solace in new friendships, in brief romances, in the pure focus of work. Yet nothing replaced the simple need to be valued by the people who'd always made me feel invisible. There is a myth that achieving great things, especially as a woman in tech, eradicates old pain. But you can win, you can accumulate success, you can fill a bank account until numbers feel abstract, and still drift alone if the ones who shaped you can't see past your old shadow. All those years, every time I pressed send on a major press release, every check I wrote to organizations that would have thrilled my parents had they come from Laura, I felt the loneliness tighten around my heart. Winning without witness is sometimes worse than not winning at all. It's a lesson I learned with every milestone that passed in silence, every headline my family never read, every call home that started and ended with Laura. And still, I kept going, because if the world of my family was small and cold, maybe I could build something bigger, something where, eventually, I'd find a sense of belonging, even if it wasn't with them. Shattered expectations at the fateful dinner. I'd spent weeks planning for what I told myself would be the night that finally changed everything between my family and me. Maybe it was naive, or maybe it was the last gasp of hope I still carried in a corner of my heart. But I genuinely believed if I made the gesture big enough, just this once, they'd see me differently. I pored over restaurant reviews, called connections for a hard-to-get reservation, debated for days between filet mignon and seafood towers. My vision was cinematic. The family gathered together at a table gleaming under the soft glow of city lights, smiles warming across linen napkins, all our old stories fading quietly into the background. It was late October, Boston's air crisp with swirling wind that blew away the sticky residue of summer. I reserved a private table at Harborview, a rooftop steakhouse perched high above the city, with glass walls offering panoramic views of the Charles River and downtown lit up like a promise. My hope was fragile, but it fluttered all the same. Every time I thought about the moment I'd hand over those surprise gifts, something bold enough to pierce the distance I'd felt since childhood. The evening arrived clear and cold. I wore my best navy dress, tailored and understated, with heels that clicked confidence against marble floors. My family arrived on time, a rarity in itself. My mother fussing with her scarf, and my father bellowing a greeting the hostess barely acknowledged. Laura swept in last, late as usual, cheeks pink from the autumn chill, and phone glued to her hand, already recounting some drama at her new job in Manhattan. The opening moments held a nervous energy I've only ever felt at family gatherings, a mix of politeness stretched thin over decades of private wounds. We were civil. I asked about Laura's move, My dad's golf games, my mother's book club. Conversation floated on the surface, skirting anything real. Menu browsing was interrupted by Laura's stories. Her celebrity client, an office happy hour, her doorman's obsession with her rescue dog. My father wanted steak, rare. My mother, a salad for the table. Laura asked for the most expensive cocktail, scanning the wine list and making a face at the Pinot Noir. I tried to relax, tried to remind myself this was about more than food or first impressions. When the waiter brought the first round of drinks, I barely tasted my own. Instead, my fingers traced the edges of crisp envelopes in my purse, each one bearing a golden leaf motif and tied with a silk ribbon. Each held a round-trip, first-class ticket to Maui. Everything planned, from the beachfront resort to the sunset cruises. Even surf lessons for Dad if he felt adventurous. I wanted to give them something priceless. Not just luxury, but the chance to reconnect, to be a family, unencumbered by our old dynamics. The conversation grew louder as the entrees arrived. Laura's stories turned into mild jabs about my workaholic hours and tech nerd lifestyle. Dad laughed at one of her jokes, then asked if my car was still running, or if I was finally doing well enough to buy one that wasn't pre-owned. Mom smiled at the waiter, quieter than usual. I cleared my throat, heart thudding as I slipped the envelopes out. "I have a surprise for everyone," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "I just wanted to thank you for everything, for being there, for putting up with me when I was younger, for letting me chase my own path. These are for you." I slid each envelope across the table, one by one. My pulse quickened as Laura's manicured fingers tore hers open first. My parents followed suit, curiosity turning to shock as plane tickets and itinerary fell into their laps. For a split second, less than a breath, I saw something flicker across my mother's face. Was it happiness or discomfort? I'll never know, because Laura's reaction set the entire tone. She tossed her ticket onto her bread plate with a theatrical sigh, eyebrows raised. "Are you serious, Jess? Still trying to buy our love, huh?" Her tone was syrupy with sarcasm. "What? Did you run out of ideas how to impress strangers, so you thought you'd try us next?" My dad's amusement was immediate and stinging. He leaned back, letting out a deep, public chuckle, loud enough that a couple at the next table turned their heads. "Nobody here actually likes you. You know that, right?" he announced, his voice echoing off glass and cutlery. The words landed with the heaviness of a slap, so casual, it almost didn't seem real. I looked at my mother for rescue, a hand, a word, any sign she might contradict them. Instead, she watched her napkin twist in her hands, refusing to make eye contact. Silence was her language, and it cut deeper than any insult. I saw her mouth tighten, her shoulders stiffen, but nothing came out. I understood then, in a way I never had before. The lack of acknowledgement wasn't just careless. It was willful. The pause that followed stretched out into a void. The world around us seemed to blur at the edges. The city noise, the clink of plates, the laughter from another table. I felt 12 again, clutching a blue ribbon, waiting for pride that would never come. Except now, I was an adult. The zeros in my bank account meaningless. The tickets to paradise just glossy paper on an indifferent table. Everything I'd worked for, every milestone, every practical sacrifice, none of it changed the fundamental equation between us. My hands trembled under the table. I kept my posture straight. "Understood," I said, my tone polished, but cold enough to freeze the moment. I looked Laura in the eyes, then Dad, then my mother, trying to memorize their faces. The confidence, the entitlement, the practiced apathy behind their reactions. There was no fight left in me to justify, to argue, or to beg for approval. Their laughter followed as I stood, the chair scraping across marble loud enough to interrupt the music. Every head in the room seemed to turn. I tucked my purse under my arm, tried to smile, the way I'd practiced in the mirror, the way you do at galas and launch events, and walked out, heels clacking over the hardwood, breath catching in the autumn air as the glass doors closed behind me. Outside, Boston sparkled, unconcerned with my heartbreak. I stood on the sidewalk, city lights blurry, through the prickle of angry tears. For years, I had told myself the next gesture, the next achievement, the next grand offering would turn the tide. But the truth was bitter and absolute. No accomplishment could puncture their indifference. The emptiness inside me was not for lack of effort or success. It was proof that sometimes the people we yearn to impress are committed to never being impressed. My phone buzzed before I could hail a cab. A text from Laura popped on the screen. The cold bit at my skin, the wind sharp, but I felt lighter with every step I took away from that building. As their laughter receded into the background, I realized that this was the last time I'd ever orchestrate my own heartbreak in the hope of family redemption. Some apologies are never coming. Some redemptions never arrive. For the first time, I no longer felt the urge to wait for theirs. By the time the cab turned the corner, I was steady. The city no longer felt quite so lonely. My family's rejection echoed, but with less weight. Something inside me shifted that night. Maybe at last, I was ready to stop seeking their approval and start seeking my own. Liberation, cutting ties with the past. By the time I set foot back in my condo that night, the city lights glimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Boston looking cold and beautiful, so different from how I felt. I sank onto the plush sofa, shoes kicked aside, dress wrinkling beneath me. My breath stuttered, slow and then heavy, the adrenaline and shame from the dinner still churning in my gut. My phone, tossed thoughtlessly onto the coffee table, buzzed with message after message. The last one burned like salt in an open wound. Still just using money to buy respect, huh? Sad. Laura. I should have felt angry, but what washed over me then was something sharper. Clarity. I sat in that silent expanse, legs pulled to my chest, the city's hum pressing through the windows. I cried, but it was different from every other time growing up. Not grief, not even humiliation, just a deep, steely resolution swelling as each tear fell. I realized there was nothing left to lose. I'd tried for decades to belong in a family that never made space for me. Every plea, every olive branch, every achievement I'd laid at their feet had been trampled by indifference or scorn. For years, I thought if I measured up, if I over-delivered, they'd finally accept me. I saw now, with a certainty I could feel in my bones, that the real betrayal would be spending one more day chained to that hope. At dawn, I stood at the bedroom window, watching the city stir awake. Cars threading through puddles, steam from chimneys vanishing into gray. I opened my laptop, hands steady in a way they never were, after family gatherings, and emailed my lawyer, Deborah. I instructed Deborah to find a private buyer, cash if possible, and to make the sale a priority. She called an hour later, never asking why. "I'll take care of it," she promised. And she did. That afternoon, I sent her every document she needed. 2 days later, an offer from a Boston developer came in. Use $2 million, no questions asked. I signed the contract, the pen gliding easily. A movement swift and almost weightless, as if I were finally, letting go of something that had weighed me down for a lifetime. The legal notice posted to my family took them by surprise. The calls began as polite confusion. My mom's uncertain voice, my father's gruff demand for an explanation. I didn't reply. Next came texts, urgent, then frantic, then furious. For the next week, I let the noise roll past me. Their anger, their attempts at guilt-tripping, the voicemails that alternated between rage and pleading. I spent my evenings walking along the Charles River, chilled autumn air on my face, the sky as wide and silent as my future. Every step away from their drama was a step toward myself. I knew not everyone would understand, but that no longer mattered either. Liberation, I learned, isn't clean or triumphant. It's a kind of quiet shedding, a slow unspooling of every unkind word, every slight and every anxious moment spent worrying what someone else might think. The day the sale closed and the funds appeared in my account, I stared at the screen so long my eyes blurred. With the sale final, I audited the rest of my own life. I thought about the family trust, the one I'd funded and let Laura manage. A security blanket for the parents and the sister who never saw me. My boyfriend, Mark, an IT systems manager with a gentle way about him, nudged me one night over dinner. "Have you looked at the withdrawals recently?" he asked, gently. I shook my head. The answer was no. When I saw the total, a sum larger than the down payment on my own home, I felt a peculiar sense of calm. The outrage I expected never came, just a cool, even certainty. I called Deborah again, instructing her to dissolve the trust and transfer the entire remaining balance to a nonprofit for foster youth in Massachusetts, the kind of kids I'd once felt kinship with, marooned in someone else's story, with no safe harbor of their own. When the family found out about the donations and the trust's closure, their fury reached a fever pitch. My phone exploded with messages, some vicious, some desperate, some threatening legal action they had no standing for. For years, I would have shrunken under the onslaught, but now I let it all go to voicemail, set my phone face down, and walked out onto my tiny balcony, breathing in winter air sharp enough to make me feel new. Taking these steps didn't heal me overnight. There were days I still grieved not just the family I had, but the one I'd spent decades hoping to create from the pieces they handed me. But slowly, day by day, I felt my tense shoulders loosen. I noticed how laughter came more easily with people who saw me for who I am. I put what I could into my company, my friendships, and into a charitable foundation I established in my grandfather's name, helping girls from underfunded schools learn to code, not for applause, but because I understood how much more they could be if someone just saw their worth. The past, I discovered, didn't leave overnight, nor did it forgive itself, but it no longer defined my path. Setting boundaries, true, final boundaries, was my act of self-respect, my quiet revolution. I wasn't running away from home. I was stepping into my own. And for once, the silence that followed was not loneliness, but peace. Betrayal by those closest to me. After years of quiet endurance, it's true that nothing truly prepares you. For the moment, all illusions shatter. Not even after you've begun stepping away. Liberation brings its own clarity, but it can also leave you exposed, raw, as newly healed skin. I thought the worst was behind me after dissolving the trust and cutting the final tethers to my family. But the real wound had yet to be revealed. Betrayal by the person I'd least expected. And the depth of that violation left me shaken too. My foundation. It began with a phone call from a friend who worked in finance, someone I'd known since high school, but only talked to occasionally. There was an oddity she said, concerning large, suspicious transfers from the Adams Family Trust, the account Laura had managed for years. I forced myself to listen, my mind a slow-moving glacier, while every instinct screamed to turn away. At first, I made excuses for Laura. Perhaps it was a clerical error, or she'd covered a crisis for our parents and was waiting to explain. But at the same time, an old, familiar ache pressed against my ribs. The knowledge that I'd always been too eager to trust, too quick to forgive, especially when it came to my sister. Mark, my partner, insisted on helping me go through the bank documents. He had the kind of forensic patience needed for this sort of work, and his careful, methodical analysis kept me from spiraling into denial. Together, we reconstructed the fund's history, tracing every debit and expense line by line. It became impossible to ignore. Laura had been transferring money, huge sums at first, then smaller, calculated amounts, right when her own advertising startup was floundering, rejected by her employer, and rapidly eating through her investment capital. I felt numb. The betrayal was staggering, not just because of the money, but because of what it represented. Years of trust, offered freely, and now violated so thoroughly. I wondered if I'd ever really known my own sister. For all our childhood differences, for the endless comparisons, and the weight of being overlooked, I truly believed we shared a sliver of mutual care, some unspoken thread that, in hard times, would bring us together. Instead, she'd chosen to see me as nothing more than a resource to exploit, a backup plan when her own ambitions went astray. The details came to light quickly. She hadn't just lost money to a poor investment. She'd covered up her actions, falsifying statements and deleting notifications to keep me, the trust's funder, in the dark. When her startup collapsed and all her investors, her friends, and professional contacts walked away, Laura simply kept siphoning money, desperate enough to risk everything. She offered no warning, never reached out for help, and certainly never admitted wrongdoing until Mark's IT audit dug up every transfer and forged memo. And all the while, she continued to present herself on social media, to our parents, to her own network, as a self-made innovator. Her setbacks spun as temporary motivation rather than the direct cause of irreparable financial betrayal. I confronted her through a terse, matter-of-fact message, attaching the documents and audit trail, leaving no room for denial. The reply came hours later, seething and defensive. "You don't understand what it's like being second best all your life. I just borrowed what was always meant to be mine." Reading her words, I was struck by the bitter irony. For years, I had felt invisible and less than. And here, Laura framed her theft as payback for imaginary slights and a birthright she'd invented for herself. Word spread quickly. The news of Laura's embezzlement reached our parents, triggering a chain reaction I'd struggled so long to avoid. Outrage filled our family group chat, and phone calls from distant relatives erupted in blame, confusion, and rumor. Laura attempted to spin her own narrative, painting herself as a misunderstood visionary, forced to act by family neglect. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Her company faced investigations, her friends distanced themselves, and even our extended family, the aunts and uncles who'd always doted on Laura, began to pull away. It was more public than I ever wanted, but there was no choice. I could no longer absorb the cost for everyone else's mistakes. I transferred what remained in the trust, a sum that still dwarfed most people's yearly incomes, to a nonprofit for homeless youth in Illinois, the state where our roots had started, but where, ironically, So much love had gone missing. Within days, legal threats began to fly from my father, who accused me of destroying our legacy, and from Laura, who tried to claim the money as her due. But the law was clear. The trust had always been in my name. The judge's dismissal came swiftly, a relief tangled with heartache. In the long, echoing weeks that followed, I sometimes lay awake and wondered if anyone could ever prepare for the kind of betrayal that splits your life in two. There's grieving, the loss of what you thought family meant, and then there's survival. No more calling or texting, no more explanations for my choices. The lines were finally, irreversibly drawn. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability, and more than anything, I wanted peace. Mark became my lifeline in those months, urging me to pour my grief into building something lasting and good. We spent late nights drafting proposals for my new foundation, the Adams STEM Foundation. One that would channel what I couldn't heal in my own history into opportunities for young women in technology. Exactly the sort of girl I had been. Overlooked, dismissed, but brimming with unseen potential. At the first board meeting, when the initial scholarship recipients sent heartfelt letters, I found myself in tears, not from pain, but from witnessing the impact of generosity rooted in transparency, of giving with no expectation that the past would ever offer closure. Betrayal changed me. It taught me not only who I couldn't trust, but who I must become if I wanted to create a different ending for others. It's a lesson learned the hard way, at a cost I wouldn't wish on anyone, but one that finally freed me from the illusion that family ties are always binding, and from the lie that my worth depends on anyone else's approval or apologies. And as months passed, I finally allowed myself to let go. Fierce, determined release. The urge to win back family, to prove myself endlessly, faded with each new dawn. My world was quieter, but not emptier. Instead, it was filled with real friendships, honest love, and the kind of simple, everyday joys I'd never learned to greet as a child. I celebrated not the absence of betrayal, but the presence of hope and the knowledge that there is power in choosing for yourself. I rebuilt, piece by piece. It took the deepest betrayal, not from strangers, but from those I once trusted most, to show me that freedom isn't given or found. It's fought for within, and it endures only when you value yourself enough to walk away, no matter how heartbreaking the choice. Betrayal left scars, yes, but it also left space. Space for new beginnings, for kinder histories, and for peace that wasn't possible under the suffocating weight of family expectations. The collapse of my old family. In the wake of Laura's financial betrayal and the final dissolving of the trust, the cracks in my family, once disguised beneath years of forced smiles and holiday obligations, began to widen into canyons. What had been surface-level dysfunction for so long was now fully exposed, glaring under the light of public humiliation and scattered loyalties. My family, already fragile, began unraveling piece by threadbare piece, and I could only watch as so much that once defined us simply crumbled away. The scandal broke quickly. Never one for subtleties, Laura's embezzlement made its way not just through family gossip, but also leaked into her professional community. Her advertising startup, already teetering, launched a full-scale internal investigation that made headlines in every Boston business journal and a few New York blogs. I remember standing in front of my window one freezing Monday morning, coffee untouched, reading messages from mutual friends who now whispered about the golden child's fall from grace. Their words were equal parts disbelief and schadenfreude. Each time my phone pinged, I flinched, half expecting another tidal wave of blame from the people who'd once only ever compared me unfavorably to Laura. At home, the silence was deafening. My mother, never adept at confrontation, withdrew even further, not reaching out to defend Laura, nor to apologize for years of blindness. My father, ever the loud patriarch, swung wildly between furious phone calls to lawyers and public rants at anyone who would listen, determined to blame someone other than his eldest daughter. He filed a lawsuit against me over the sale of the Cape Cod home, claiming it was never truly mine to give up. But the court's dismissal was swift. The deed and my grandfather's will were ironclad. Even this legal defeat played out in the shadow of Laura's far more public undoing. Extended family members who once circled our clan at Thanksgiving dinners now kept their distance, reluctant to take a side as the Adams name grew heavy with rumor. Group chats splintered. Aunts and uncles, who had always seemed neutral, quietly stopped responding. My mother's siblings, especially the ones from Indiana, took to sending me cautiously worded emails, a mix of concern, latent blame, and veiled gratitude that I had spared them the worst of it by keeping most details out of the news. Laura's public persona, meticulously curated on social media for years, collapsed overnight. She attempted to spin the situation. As innovators do, she claimed setbacks, misunderstandings, and even hinted at sabotage. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her startup board ousted her. Her friends in Manhattan stopped inviting her to their rooftop gatherings, and her name quickly became a cautionary tale at local networking events. Once so admired for her charm and drive, Laura was suddenly ostracized. Her attempts to launch a comeback or save face seemed only to dig her deeper into a pit of denial and bitterness. Watching Laura spiral, I felt a strange mix of empathy and detachment. In the past, I might have rushed to cool the fires or shield her from consequences, thinking, wrongly, that covering for her would somehow win acceptance or recognition. But I'd learned, finally, that stepping in only erased more of myself. Instead, I kept my distance and focused on things that brought me peace and purpose. I poured my energy into the Adams STEM Foundation, building something enduring out of the ruins, not for validation, but to put my pain to use. Meanwhile, my father's anger calcified into bitterness. He became almost obsessed with what he saw as family legacy slipping through his fingers. Not just the property, not just the money, but the image he'd spent decades building within our community. Neighbors noticed the change. Old friends stopped calling as frequently. My mother retreated further into routine. Her book clubs, her gardening, her endless tidying, a ghost haunting the empty house. The emotional debris was everywhere. Old photos came down from mantels. Family recipes disappeared from holiday tables. And the rare occasions when anyone did gather felt more like funerals for things we refused to grieve properly. Our shared past was suddenly suspect, every memory tinged with uncertainty or revisionist blame. It was shocking, heartbreaking, sometimes amusing in a dark way, how quickly a family can disintegrate under the weight of secrets and betrayals exposed. As for me, solitude lost its sting and became a quiet companion. The energy I once spent chasing acceptance went into small, affirming rituals, sunrise walks by the river, weekends painting or tinkering with old code, real conversations with friends who never needed to be impressed. Mark, ever present and patient, helped me understand what healthy support truly looked like. He never pressed for gossip, never treated my family's collapse as a flaw I needed to fix. Instead, we built a new kind of intimacy, one based on listening and laughter and freedom. The collapse forced me to redefine family. Blood became a footnote rather than a source of obligation. I discovered new family in the girls I mentored, their eyes bright with the kind of hope I'd once nearly lost. I found kinship in colleagues who shared my sense of purpose, in friends who showed up for me after the last of the headlines faded. Conversations around trust and healthy boundaries replaced the tired debates about loyalty and guilt that had so long dominated my home life. At times, regret still pricked at me, ghostly and fleeting, like childhood echoes in empty hallways. There were moments when I yearned for a simple reconciliation, just a small gesture from my parents or Laura, a phone call, a card, a genuine apology. But as months passed, I realized these hopes no longer ruled me. I mourned the fantasy of a close-knit family, and in giving it up, I gained something rarer: peace. In the end, the collapse of my old family wasn't a single shattering event, but a slow dissolution, like a faded photograph turning to dust. We'd each lost something, and perhaps in that there was a strange, shared justice. Yet I was no longer trapped within the ruins. I'd built a new foundation, brick by brick, out of hard-won self-respect and compassion, for others who knew what it meant to start over. Looking back, I don't feel anger so much as gratitude for the clarity that comes when the past can no longer cloud the present. I learned that a family built on conditions, silence, and envy is like a house on sand. It will fall, sooner or later. Real belonging, I discovered, is chosen and nurtured, built on trust, honesty, and a willingness to grow beyond old wounds. The Addams family, as it once was, no longer exists. In its place, I found space for new beginnings, gentler histories, quieter Christmases, and genuine connection unmarred by old rules or roles. The collapse, though painful, was not the end. It was, finally, a beginning, one I claimed for myself, without apology or fear, renewal, and new beginnings. After all the heartbreak, betrayals, and the slow crumbling of my family ties, I thought peace would be a kind of emptiness. Quiet, yes, but tinged with a tinge of loneliness and regret. The truth, as I discovered quietly and over time, was much more nuanced and infinitely richer than I'd let myself hope. Renewal isn't a dramatic rebirth. It's the slow gathering of selfhood from the ashes of old stories, a process of finally meeting yourself for the first time. The winter after my final break with my family was the first in years I remembered sleeping soundly and waking without dread gnawing in my stomach. My days became gentle rituals, morning runs by the riverbanks, sunlight glinting off crusts of ice, afternoons spent sketching or coding in cozy coffee shops, the sound of strangers' laughter offering comfort rather than reminder of what I'd lost. For the first time, I let the world see me, not as the quiet one, or the forgotten sister, or the unfailing daughter, but simply as Jessica. Every time I introduced myself without mentioning my family, a crack of new confidence grew in me. Small, almost shy at first, but real all the same. When my grandfather's old letter finally reached me, a faded envelope from a safety deposit box, containing words of encouragement and pride for the person I would become, I wept, but it wasn't grief. It was gratitude. I had lived my entire life waiting for validation from people who couldn't give it. And in his careful handwriting, I found the only approval I ever truly needed. His praise was simple, but it cut through every layer of old hurt. No matter where you go, remember that worth comes from inside. Make your life and be unafraid. Mark's love was a surprise, too. Our time together grew less frantic and more rooted, shaped not by shared trauma, but by genuine care in the quiet growth we fostered together. He taught me to trust intimacy without conditions. When he proposed, it was over breakfast in worn-out pajamas. A small, sweet moment, as far from the grand gestures of my upbringing as possible. We got married in a small chapel, invited only close friends, and a handful of mentors who'd guided us along the way. There was no tears over empty seats, just laughter, the soft candlelight, and the sense that, for once, I was building home from the ground up, on my own terms. I devoted myself to work that mattered. The Adams STEM Foundation became not just a philanthropy, but my lifeline, a way to channel everything I'd overcome into fuel for someone else's beginning. Meeting the first scholarship recipients, hearing them talk about the power of being believed in, reminded me how transformation always starts with a single person saying, "I see you." They asked me for advice, but I often learned just as much from their hope and resilience. In mentoring, I found a family not of blood, but of shared purpose. Renewal also meant confronting old wounds, but now I saw them not as defining, but simply as part of my story. I visited places I'd once avoided, a childhood park, the cafe where I'd overheard my parents compare me to Laura. Sometimes I let the memories come, felt the old ache, and then let it drift away. I sorted through boxes of photographs and chose the ones that made me smile, building a new wall of memories with Mark and my friends. I discovered that closure doesn't mean forgetting or forgiving what can't be forgiven. It's accepting that you deserve to start fresh, no matter the past. Community also became my anchor. I joined a running club, signed up for open mic nights even when my hands trembled, and hosted dinner parties where nobody cared about my resume. The people who showed up celebrated wins of all sizes: first poems, new jobs, inventions, heartbreaks survived. Their generosity made me feel seen without requirement, loved with a simplicity I'd long believed out of reach. My relationship with the idea of family shifted too. I no longer craved redemption or reunion. On holidays, I called friends, reached out to mentors, and gave back through foundation projects. The empty ache slowly faded, replaced by a lighter, buoyant hope, a sense that I was allowed to be happy, even if that happiness looked different than what I'd been taught to expect. When the foundation grew enough to warrant its own office, I decorated it with artwork by the students it had funded and a small brass plaque. For the girls who dream beyond the shadow. It was both a memorial and a promise, a vow that cycles of neglect and comparison could end with me, and that new beginnings are always possible, even when the past refuses to yield an apology or repair. If there was a single moment when I knew I was changed, it came one rainy evening as I watched a group of my mentees file out after a workshop, their laughter echoing through the halls. I didn't feel the hollow emptiness of longing. Instead, I was filled with quiet pride, not for saving anyone, but for giving what I'd never had: space, visibility, encouragement. It was astonishing how healing could flow outward, like warmth radiating from a newly built hearthlight. My world is quieter now, but infinitely richer. I read more books, plant small gardens on my balcony, and let myself dream in ways that once felt forbidden. I am no longer perfect or invisible. I am whole, resilient, and finally, undeniably, myself. The pain of the past is not erased, but it has made room for grace. In the end, I learned that renewal is not about going back or writing over what was broken, but forging onward with what is left and discovering it is more than enough. My new beginnings are not grand or cinematic, but made up of honest joys. A rainy run, a student's thank you, a shared meal, a loving glance. I have reclaimed my life, and with it, a sense of home I carry wherever I go.